there's a way in which Calcutta sets a kind of benchmark with an organization like the Calcutta Art Studio, because I think that's one of the earliest, along with a press in Pune called the Chitrashala Steam Press, on which Christopher Pinney has worked much more. And they had a very strong political connection also with Tilak. In Calcutta, there were no direct political connections. What's interesting with Calcutta Art Studio is that we can identify the names of the artists who set it up. And this is coming to me largely through the work of Kamal Sarkar, who writes one of the first, you would say, scholarly articles on this. Calcutta Art Studio actually still existed on Bowbajar Street, and it was set up by 4 ex-students of the Government School of Art, the best known of whom was Annoda Prasad Bakchi, Nabu Kumar Bishwas, Phonibhushan Sen, Krishna Chandra Pal, and Jogendranath Mukherjee. It's Nabu Kumar Bishwas's family which retained the hold of the press. So in fact, there was somebody in my college called Madhumita Bishwas who said it was from her family. There was a thing. So that sets, and they are art school trained, so they have direct access to what we will call neoclassical paintings. Their kind of backdrops of particular kinds. So, and then there's a proliferation. With the later presses, later in the sense 1880s, so clearly Calcutta Art Studio is setting what we will call a trend in what they're calling Hindu mytho pictures. They were calling them those. They're doing much other work. They're doing typeface work, they're doing a bit of photography, they're doing other lettering, but clearly this is the big market they're entering. They're carrying new skills and printing technologies. Now, with the other studios, interestingly in Kolkata, and I'll restrict now to Kolkata because that is what this exhibition is about. With Kasharipara, Chorbagan, and Imperial Art Cottage, assuming that these are the 3 main ones, we come across a few others too. In Harrison Road, for instance, they're art framers. Now, Jeet is telling me that the art framers could also have been having a press themselves. So often a framing company is also running a press maybe. But what is a challenge here is tracing who were the artists behind these presses. Now they call themselves art studios, which means that they want to have that pedigree of being an art studio. But were there artists directly acquiring art college training? Art college then is in Goranhata, the same area in which these presses are. So chances are that there's a coming and going of techniques and technologies between the art college and those outside it. So it's a more porous space from which things can flow outwards, just as those interested in learning could have also entered and learned. So that is an enigmatic area for which we don't have a very rich history. Because, and I think if there is more research to be done, which, and I think Moshami was also telling me that just following the names of the presses and the dealers allow us to think of a spatial belt in 19th century Kolkata, which can stretch from Bowbajar, which is more central, up to upper and lower Chitpur Road, because even Vamapada Banerjee's material is being sold and distributed by somebody called Roy Babaji and Company, who's from lower Chitpur Road. And all these other presses are there. The Imperial Art Cottage is right next to the Pathuria Ghata palaces. So the chances are that these rich homes would have also been some of the buyers. While they're buying European art or copies of European art, this material was also of interest, and the hierarchies are there. So this is again interesting that this material has today again, we don't know how far Kasharipara, Chorbagan or Imperial Art Cottage material traveled elsewhere, but we know Calcutta Art Studio did. They are competing with Ravi Verma's own presses, and in Western India it's Ravi Verma's press which is then sold, and the number of press come up, all of which use his name. Now what's interesting is Annoda Bakchi never acquires that kind of iconic status. nor does Vamapada Banerjee. Though, if you think of it, this is a history running parallel to that of Ravi Verma. Ravi Verma becomes a household name. And in art worlds, he also becomes a name that signifies how an oil painter could become, once he caters to a popular market, then many people begin to copy his work, right? He runs a studio, he would do a main drawing, others would do it. So they're mass produced. So this is, Ravi Verma becomes a generic name, but we now know that there are other artists, whether Annoda Bakchi and Navakumar Bishal. There's one print here which has a sign saying Pony. Now we know there's Pony Bhushan Rai is one of them. So sometimes, and by the time we are coming to Vamapada Banerjee or Bhavani Charan Laha or Shital Bandyopadhyay, the artist is signing these pictures, which means that less important than the press is now the artist. So the artist, Vamapada Banerjee and Bhavani Charan Laha, this is not their only work. Even Annoda Bakchi has a full-time job teaching oil painting in the Government Art College. But with Vamapada Banerjee and Bhavani Laha, they have art college trainings. They are portrait painters. So they have that stature of being good oil painters and they do portrait painting. In fact, there's one of the Victoria Memorial portraits of Bankim Chandra is by Vamapada Banerjee. So they are portrait painters, but this is a parallel trade they're into. Clearly, this is bringing them maybe far greater money once you can start doing, and their work, because they're signed, I think carry a different weight even in the market of that time. So maybe a Vamapada Banerjee is not as well known as Ravi Verma, but to a smaller market here, obviously there's a name, which is why he can afford to send his works to Germany to be printed. Now, one question I always had is that given that the technology here is already quite developed, did they really need to send it to Germany or Switzerland? Ravi Verma brought a German team in to set up his press. So he's using German technology in the 1890s to set up his press with somebody called Schlesinger, and then that press winds up. But the material is sold and a large amount of that material travels to Germany also. I think a lot of it goes. But in Kolkata or Calcutta then, both chromolithography and oleography are being locally done. Yet, Vamapada Banerjee and Bhavani Laha, not Shital Bandyopadhyay, are actually sending it abroad, which means they have the resources. They're probably, so how you send, they would probably be sending a lithostone? No.
They used to send lithostones, but...
That's what I'm asking. No, would they be sending a lithostone, or would they be sending a master print from which more prints would be made?
I guess they send lithostones. A lot of stones are still found, and the stone used to be brought back, I assume. But the other thing is why they did not step into Ravi Verma was it's a I and me situation. They don't want to be associated with Ravi Verma. Ravi Verma, one is, it is across the country. They rather send it across the globe to Germany and be rest assured of a certain quality, which that quality Ravi Verma, they were a little iffy about. Not saying Ravi Verma was in, they were iffy, I guess. And then the other thing that Ravi Verma did was all Ravi Verma prints, even if it was by you or by me, it always had and printed at the Ravi Verma press, so and so. So that is also something that they didn't want. So you were indirectly being associated as a Ravi Verma person.
Ravi Verma becomes like a trademark.
Ravi Verma becomes like a trademark.
So Vamapada Banerjee is interesting, and there is a book on him which will talk about why, I don't think they really asked the question why, that he is actually reaching out to German technology. But we know that the Germans are already in the trade through Ravi Verma. So maybe already there are links there.
But unlike Ravi Verma, which set up
The
a press here,
in Lonavala.
this used to travel to Germany, get printed there, and they used to come back in shiploads.
And then they would have dealers who would then sell them.
And they were sold here. So it was a much easier process to get it printed in the western part of the country than send it to Germany. I assume they did not get it printed there because of the reasons that I said.
Because of the competition.
It's also a branding situation.
I think the printed in Germany and the printed in Switzerland would have given them a different branding. Absolutely.
A different branding. And also they didn't want to be associated with a very well-known national name.
Yeah.
That was Ravi
also
Verma.
Interesting, since we are sitting with a large number of Bamapada Banerjees behind us, is that Bamapada Banerjee is, strictly speaking, not painting altar pictures. They are not God pictures in the way that Chorbagan would. A Radha Krishna, a series of Radha Krishnas are there. They are more narrative, they are more episodic. In that sense, he's following a Ravi Verma template. If you think of it, Obhimanyu and couples. Arjun Shubhadra, Ravi Verma, here there's Obhimanyu, Uttara, and others. So one of the couples. So he's using palace backdrops and he's using landscape backdrops. So are the presses earlier. So I think he's developing them as episodes where, and I therefore, it's again a presumption, and obviously we never were able to really track, would they have hung in a parlor or would they have hung in an inner altar? That's why the title between or from means they could have switched positions. But I get a sense that Bamapada Banerjee may well have found their place in drawing rooms because they are like narrative neoclassical paintings where you're depicting an episode and normally the full episode is given there. The detailed Damayanti being rescued from a well. One of my favorites is Kaliya Daman. What's interesting is also how many of this moves into advertising. So we see that Kaliya Daman is then moving into gripe water advertisements and many others. So is Calcutta Art Studio print. There's a famous Saraswati which is being used for Lokhi Bilash hair oil also. There's Kali, which is being used as Swadeshi posters. So it's interesting between commerce and politics and this art, it's actually partaking of this larger field. So what's interesting is Kaliya Daman certainly enters into advertising prints at the same time. So whether they took the patent of the artist, we don't know, because in this field, it's hard to have that patent. But even in Botala, presses were very careful that they should not be pirated. Often lekha thakto niche je a print code. So I have a feeling the reason for putting the names of the presses, the address and dealer is also to establish a certain authenticity, that there could be other people who are copying them but they're not carrying the print. Same for Bamapada Banerjee, I think. Bhavani Laha is doing less of the work. He's working and he's from a fairly well-established family, the Lahabari of Tontonia. So he's coming from clearly a very wealthy family. So I think this is a journey, and even with the Chorbagan prints or the Kashari Para, there's a mix of dense narrative work like the one, which is the one of the lady rising, Urvashi now. So see, if you see the range, I'm interested in two pictures here. One of Gaurnitai and one Monosha. What strikes me is the color palette, which is quite distinctive. They're not very loud. Most of these pictures were usually denigrated because of the excess of color, loud, garish color. Now they are dealing with far more muted pastel shades. Monosha's modeling of her face is very distinctive. And so is that of Gaurnitai. Calcutta Art Studio artists also are doing portraits, and 2 examples are here. So there's also a market therefore for portraits of eminent Bengalis. And they're catering to that market too. So that's kind of semi-nationalist. Surendranath Banerjee is there. So many of the portraits show their hands in what we call academic realism. They clearly have a handful. So that mix that you do portraits, and even within the range of mythological work you do, we can think of them as all belonging to one set. But when we move around the room, if you have the discerning eye, which all art historians are meant to do, you actually say, whether you like the aesthetics or not, they're very distinctive styles, and there's often a mix of styles the same press is producing. Imperial Art Cottage, I think, is particularly interesting, and it doesn't last that long, and it doesn't have that bigger name and market that Kasharipara and Chol. I think their output was less. I saw them with R.P. Gupta, and I'm seeing some with G. Now, so this is a broad history that belongs to this period. Now, when you began collecting, to just return, did you first collect the Bamapada Banerjee, or did you first collect Calcutta Art Studio?
I was buying it, as I said earlier, I was buying it from people who were dealers.
No, but which were do you have a sense when you recollect that, were you buying Bamapada Banerjee at the same time that you were buying a Chorbagan print?
I was buying everything that came my way, one.
What first came your way?
About a bit of Sheetal, a bit of Bamapada, a bit of the press.
Which
the old
presses?
Kasharipara, Chorbagan.
And in terms of prices, were they equally priced, say a Bamapada Banerjee print and a Chorbagan print?
A Chorbagan Kasharipara was obviously far more demanding monetarily than a Bamapada.
Really? But I think in his own time, a Bamapada Banerjee print would have perhaps sold at a higher price than Chorbagan, simply because it was an artist a Germany printed. But so, in a later market, Bamapada's price was lower.
Then what happened was, I'm looking at 3 artists, Bamapada, Bhavanilaha and Sheetal. But there, in comparison, the press prices have gone through the roof over the last couple of years, for the last 10 years. They are still relatively cheaper than the press. A lot of the press, and more so with the Shundaris.
By press you mean the Kasharipara,
Chorbagan. Yeah. When I say the press, I'm talking about Kasharipara and Chorbagan. And the Shundaris have gone through the roof price-wise.
That is from the time you first collected to
From now? The time that I started collecting.
To now?
To now.
Okay.
And
why do you think? Is it because of the sexual erotic nature of the women in there?
You said it. That is one of the reasons why it's like that. 2 is that this, for them, most Bengal prints there is a myth to it, or there is an idea to it, or there is a story to it. These are beyond stories and beyond ideas. You can see them as attractive woman images.
Okay, now I would say one of the reasons, and we have 4 of them here. One is called Pramoda Shundari, which is the one that Jeet had acquired before. And one is Manada Shundari. I don't have the names here with me. Actually, they follow a very clear template. So even though they could have come from, I think they're all Kasharipara. One could be Chorbagan. And I would say there's a lot of borrowing and exchange of styles too. Because especially Kasharipara and Chorbagan prints are often not that easy to distinguish, except say the ones there, the loudness of colors, especially a bright pink, a bright blue, a bright yellow, like you have in Radha Krishna there, or in the one of that one Madan Bhasho, where you have a picturesque landscape, but the colors burst out of them, right? They're not naturalistic colors. I think becomes the mark. These presses, I think one of the reasons why they still attract, and they're attracting so much, is there's also an affinity to Kalighat painting, because the women seem to be traveling out of Kalighat painting into these prints, and they are now taking their place in Western style boudoirs. So there's like, they're almost like same curtains and carpets that repeat themselves often. They're wearing white and black, which means they're possibly women, widows, who have entered, become courtesans, entered the sex trade, we don't know. But their positioning and the voluptuous nature of this work, I think also links them to this mystery on who were these women who feature in Kalighat painting. Who are the women who then begin to feature in these prints as musicians, as courtesans, but often carrying a rose, Golab Shundari, often doing embroidery, often looking at a mirror, which are standard Naika postures, right? That they are there as part often of a larger classical lineage. Ananga Manjari, they're often called, that they're coming out of these texts, but they're also very contemporary, because their setting means they could be set in the home of a Babu of that period. So I think this four, and I could see why their market value would today be rising, because they are part of a very distinctive series. They're not mythological pictures, they're part of a distinctive series, a social series. So I would say that they would be now competing with Kalighat in terms of price and market. I also feel that when you're telling me that a Bamapada or a Shitol Bandyopadhyay you could buy for less, it means that Kasharipara and Chorbagan belong to late 19th century Chitpur, Kolkata. They signify that culture of that time. And therefore, they are carrying a trace of that a bit more. Bamapada, we are not identifying so much with a North Kolkata press, even though he has a North Kolkata dealer. Coming to Shitol, the artist who I knew about the least when I did my research was Shitol Chandra Bandyopadhyay. I did not know very much on him, and I had not come across too much of his works in the collections I saw. It's with Jeet's collection that this name springs to life, because even in this exhibition, what was new for many people was Shitol Bandyopadhyay. Now, Shitol Bandyopadhyay, the name has associations. For instance, my supervisor, Tapan Rai Chowdhury, never had any taste for these pictures. But I still persuaded him to come and see it. I said, "Ami curate korechi, please ashben." So he came. When he saw Shitol Bandyopadhyay, his face lit up. I said, "Keno?" Bolo, "Oke to amra Shitol Jetha boltam." So it's somebody they seem to know. Same is true with Madhabi Mukherjee. It seems that she was related, because she was a kind of mama of Madhabi Mukherjee, because that's why Mimi Bhattacharya said, once you gave a talk on these popular pictures, and I came back and said, "Ma, okhane Shitol Bandyopadhyay chhobi chilo." So Shitol Bandyopadhyay is obviously a middle class name. He's slightly later. His dates are, I think, 1920s and 30s. See, Shitol Bandyopadhyay, I think more research needs to be done, because there's actually a home, Vrindavan Pal Lane, mentioned near Shyambajar. So it's worth seeing whether anything still exists. Very often, North Kolkata houses are not demolished in the same way as South Kolkata homes are. And there are 2 or 3 different presses he's working for. What's also interesting, he's carrying actual Podabuli lines with his pictures. Jeta Bengal school shomoy onek shomoy Robindranather kichu lines diye hoto. So he's catering to a middle class market. Also, his work is primarily on Radha Krishna. I think that is very central, but he's using soft focus. A certain kind of Bengal school styles are coming in. He's coming in.
What is interesting is
I think more research needs to be done on Shitol Bandyopadhyay.
He has a Ramakrishna Vivekananda there, Shitol, right here.
Okay. So he's also doing that.
He's also doing
but
that.
I think he's mainly known for his Radha Krishna pictures, which have lines from Vaishnav Padavali there. And he's staying in a place called Vrindavan Lane, but he's also his press, he's working from Lokhi Vilas Press and the Goyard Press. So in this case, you have a home, an artist who's trained, we do not know of Shital Bandyopadhyay doing any other work outside this. So is he also a painter? Like Bhavani Laha, we know as a photographer and painter, so is Bhamapada Banerjee. With Shital Bandyopadhyay, we're not very sure. Maybe this is the only work he does. And again, this network of his home. And so normally the home is mentioned because I think the home is the place from where these would be sold. So I think that's very important to mention the address, because a person seeing it in one home would be able to then go to the press and order more of that. So I think Shital Bandyopadhyay worked with the same logic. I think his work also came out in the journals of that time.
It did.
Not in Prabashri Modern Review, perhaps in Shahitya, Bharatvarsho. So it's a slightly less, so within these periodicals there are hierarchies. So Bharatvarsho, Boshumati are catering to a larger middle class. It's like you have Rituparna Ghoshal's films and you have the Bangla television serials, right? So television serials, often the same person is seeing both. But the television serial is catering to a larger, it captures the taste of the middle class, whether we like it or not. So I think Shital was able to capture the taste of the Bengali middle class and clearly had quite a thriving business that was operating from his home in Shambhajar, and he was working with different presses. What is interesting is this one, where we don't have the name of an artist.
No, that is a collage.
So that was in Western India. Jyotindra Jain says that you would have a backdrop and then you would take gods and paste them all over. So you could use the same backdrop for
This is a Swiss mountain, and these images are obviously local images where they did a cut and paste with it.
So the cut and paste, the Western Indian prints are very interesting. They even have jewel little sequins placed on them. So they have a tactile quality, even the collages, there's a backdrop and there's cutting and pasting done. So it's like a thriving industry where, depending on what a client wants, you could give this backdrop and place this god in it. So somebody says, okay, I want a Swiss scenery and I want Shiver Taposha there, they will do it for you. It's also that. And the sequence is also because the Chodbagan pictures carry a sense of tactility, but there are no actual sequence. But the Western India prints do have sequence. Now that you mentioned that a few pictures here are new compared to this exhibition. So how much more have you now acquired? And have you acquired again from presses all over India, or have you restricted yourself much more to Bengal?
I have restricted myself to Bengal because the All India space is unattainable for me. So is Bengal in many ways.
But when you got your Western India prints,
when I was getting a Western India prints,
were you coming through the same dealers who sold you the Bengal prints?
Sometimes yes. But I then grew wiser and I said, let me restrict myself to Bengal because the pan-India is way too large a canvas. So I have restricted myself to Bengal. A lot of people, if I may say, are also doing Bengal and following the same logic that you can't do a pan-India sitting in Kolkata with limited resources. So you restrict yourself to Bengal.
Is there still a lot coming onto the market? A lot of these pictures?
Less is coming onto the market. And
are the big galleries now
and the prices,
taking them over like DAG?
And the prices have gone, for me as an individual, it's gone through the roof. Because the prices...
Is it because bigger players have come in?
Because bigger players have come in, because a lot of moneyed people have come in. A lot of people are positioning themselves as collectors who are actually dealers. So there are a couple of people who are claiming to be collectors.
So I found that the private collections were going to be dispersed. So I like to think of these prints as part of a history of selling. They were meant to be done in multiple copies and sold, so you don't have singular prints. So that's what differentiates it from even an artist prints. Artist prints are limited edition. These were meant to be mass produced, mass manufactured. Now the quantity of course would differ depending on the markets, but obviously it was cheaper to print 50 rather than to print 1, so that they would go into it.
I mean, I've heard from RP Gupta is that some of the Mahapados were sold in bunch behind New Market, near Elite Cinema. They were stacked up and they were sold. I'm talking about the 1940s or 1950s or even in the 60s.
60s, I think.
Even in the 60s.
60s is when he's
60s, it had, not 40s, I'm sorry.
60s.
It was more in the 60s and in the early 70s when I was still at home or going to school. A lot of these they were stacked up on the road and sold in the sidewalks.
So even now, if you go to Esplanade Dharmakala, there's a lot of pavement art being sold. So I think, if you think of a North Kolkata at that time, a lot of them would have been selling them right outside studios, outside streets, so that people wandering in that area. And there's also the Bottala, the book printing presses. So there's a kind of thriving quality to both the printed book and the printed picture of late 19th century Calcutta, with Chitpur in its broader sense there. And if you listen or you read, say, Obadindranath's memoirs, it's very clear that they're even entering the Jorashako house, because she said, I saw Kali Khate Chobi Amar Pishimar Ghore, etc. But they're also learning to distance themselves from this art in order to produce what they will see as much more refined pictures, right? So there's the middle class is both distancing itself, at the same time there's a market for it. So again, that's why I'm saying there's a kind of layering of tastes that they speak to.
The other thing that over the years I've noticed is whenever I've gone Pujo, over the last 20 years, the last 25 years, when I've been shooting Pujos, I look a little carefully and every time, I mean, every now and then I see a known print in the Dalan.
Now, a final question. Do these pictures, I'm thinking of these two Bamapada Banerjee, which are larger than the others.
They're very rare. I only know of about 4 of these.
Yeah, so they're almost
of this size.
Yeah, and because they don't have the print,
they've been cut out, I guess.
Cut out, and there's a kind of title given there.
Right.
They could be like oil paintings.
They were treated like, I mean,
So do they come framed to you? That's one question.
They always come framed.
Yeah, because you told me that Bamapada Banerjee, you were getting a full bunch in mint condition, which means they had never been opened really.
They've never been opened.
So it means that because if they're coming to you framed, it means that the dealers have probably got them.
A dealer
would not reframe them.
Would not frame them to begin with.
That's what I'm saying. So they already acquired them framed.
Because they were all framed, he would not take the trouble of reframing.
That's what I meant. So that's what I'm saying,
but the ones that I have, which comes from the collection, from various private collections, but I got them in bunch. So I've got, say, about 20 Bamapada lying in one place.
And they were not framed, they came as a set folio.
They came as a set and they were in mint condition.
So did they come with a cover? Would you kind of buy them with a cover telling you, like nowadays, the Lalit Kala prints,
there was no cover to it. I got them.
And each of them would have a name beneath it like this.
Yeah.
And you got these framed later?
Not all of them. Some I got framed, some came framed. Some I got framed for your exhibition, but most I got framed.
Sheetal Bandyopadhyay came framed?
A lot of Sheetal came
framed. I'm asking the question because it also means that they were collected from homes where they were already hanging on walls, right?
There you are.